Let's continue here on Box to Row. You see the gentleman on the screen in his first season as the general manager of the Detroit Lions. As a matter of fact, a former public relations intern, scout, and executive with the Rams. And of course, you know what the Rams have been able to do to this point. And he's an A&T grad, was part of that 1999 HBCU National Championship team. He is Brad Holmes. He joins us here on Box to Row. It's been a long time, Brad. Good to see you. Welcome to the program.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me, Donald. Great to chop it up with a fellow Aggie again, and good to see a familiar face.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Glad to have you. Know you're busy. So let me start here. You're just getting in, right? And you got, you had a trade right away. But even before we get to that, your thoughts on how camp is going to this point?
Yeah, it's still in the early stages, but the best thing is that how the team is gelling. And, that's a huge credit to Dan and the rest of the coaching staff of making sure that everything's been cohesive. Dan and I were just talking about it today in terms of how efficient Jared was looking and how much he's gelling within the offense, but just the whole team in general, that's really what's been the positive thing to take away from it. But they're playing fast. Coach staff's doing a hell of a job, and hopefully it's good, a sign for good things to come.
You had a really good draft, and I want to talk more about that. You weren't even hardly in the door, right? And one of the first moves you made, the decision you had to make was ultimately to trade Matthew Stafford, who was a guy in Detroit, beloved, a lot of success, right, for himself. But I want to get your thoughts on the decision to make the trade. You get 2 first-round picks back, plus you get back a gentleman in Jared Goff.
Yeah, I do think it was a win-win for both sides. It was mutual. He requested the trade, and I respected it. And we had great discussion and dialogue from the very, very start. I was a fan of Stafford coming in and very excited to work with him. And when he requested the trade, actually became more of a fan in terms of his professionalism and maturity of how he handled everything. So it was a win-win. So it's all the best to him and his future endeavors. But I do think that we're set up pretty nice for the future.
Take us through this. My understanding, at least from what I read, was that you may not have necessarily been on Detroit's radar for this position before, right? But you obviously, when you look at what you were able to do with the Rams, Aaron Donald, you know football. There's no question about that. I guess a 2-part question. What made this the right job for you? And then ultimately take us through the process, again, not really being on the radar, but you ultimately were able to land this job.
Yeah, well, I'll start off with the about not being on the radar. So, I've always said coming up in this process, I've always just kept my head down and tried to be the best in the role that I was in. And so when I, started to get, approached and started having discussions about, becoming a GM, and you start the preparation process, you have, they have combine interviews, video interviews that they record for aspiring candidates for not only GMs, but head coaches as well. And the first time I did it back in, I believe it was 2013, I believe, or 2014, the first time I was like director. I didn't think I did very well on that video interview. And sometimes you say, look, a loss or a failure, you got to take it as a learning lesson. Well, it really just drove me to prepare even better for the areas that I wasn't being exposed to with, salary cap and free agency and the pro scouting side of things. So I was fortunate enough to get blessed with another opportunity to do one of those video interviews. And it was a blessing that Mike Disner, our senior vice president of business administration, football administration, was able to see that video and then get into the eyes of Sheila and Rod and Chris Spielman. And, that was my opportunity to come in and interview. And that's pretty much how the process went. Had a normal Zoom interview and then was able to come in for a formal interview and fortunately get the job. But, Actually interviewing with multiple teams and going through that process, I had interviews back to back with two different teams. And I will say, when I interviewed with Sheila and Rod and, had a chance to see what the Ford fan was all about, it just makes sense. You just know, you feel something in your gut when it's right, it's just right. And, the support that Sheila and Rod, Chris Spielman, Mike Disner, that they've supported me with and surrounded me with, I couldn't be happier. It's honoring, it's humbling to be in a situation, work for an organization in the Ford family. They're very, very special people. So very fortunate. It is the right place to be, and I couldn't think of being in this job anywhere else.
Brad Holmes, of course, is the general manager of the Detroit Lions. He joins us here on Box to Row. To you, what does it mean? I mean, I was excited for you as an A&T grad, as former SID at A&T when you played there. We'll talk more about that. But then also as a brother, like, it's not many Black folks that are in these type of positions. What does that mean to you? And by the way, what's interesting to me about the city of Detroit, Troy Weaver is a Bowie State alum. So even more exciting, you're an HBCU alum, and the two of the four major sports, if you will, in Detroit have HBCU alums as general managers.
Yeah, well, first of all, it means a lot to me, and congratulations to Troy. I know he just had his draft with that #1 pick, and I know the kid's really talented. But congrats to him. And Troy's been very, very welcoming to the city of Detroit in terms of, we've had instant communication as soon as I got the job. But it does mean a lot. Just coming up, it is a sign of hope. Hopefully that I can provide others. I do know that coming up, when I had aspirations of becoming a GM, I've always said, like, I had to cut out of Ozzie Newsome, hoisting up a Lombardi trophy. And that brought hope to me, thinking that, you see another successful Black man do that. And, everything that my father taught me in terms of all the issues that he struggled with. My father played for A&T and played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, being in the NFL in the early 70s, and things dealing with race and stereotypes that he had to deal with, that he taught me. And so then to become a proud HBCU alum, come from A&T and then make it to this level, that means a lot. And hopefully that we can do this thing the right way. There's still more progress that needs to be done. The numbers aren't nearly there where they should be yet, but very, very happy to increase the numbers of GMs that hired. We had 3 this past year with Terry in Atlanta and Martin Mayhew in Washington and myself. So progress is being made, and hopefully we'll have more.
Can you speak to how your time in with St. Louis and LA with the Rams, again, starting out as a PR I find that fascinating in of itself, and we can talk more about how you even got there. But to be able to go to do what you did with the Rams, speak to how that, in all the years with the Rams, prepared you now to be the GM of the Lions.
Yeah, well, starting from the very beginning, coming in as a PR intern, I was just trying to get my foot in the door, and was fortunate enough to do that whole season, pretty much when the greatest show on turf was still relatively alive. A lot of those players were kind of coming towards the end of their career, kind of getting up in the twilight area. But being around a lot of great players like the Marshall Faulks and Orlando Paces and Kurt Warners and Aeneas Williams. I mean, I could go on and on. Leonard Little, all those guys. But met Wilbert Montgomery, who was our running backs coach at the time. And, we used to talk football a lot, and we struck up a great relationship. And then him introducing me to Charlie Army, our GM at the time. And just, again, like I said at the beginning, fortunately being able to be hired full-time as a scouting assistant and just working my way up, just focusing on what I had to do at the time. But I would say the past, let's say starting from 2017, when Sean McVay was hired and Les was still on board, you know, we just had a very collaborative culture back with the Rams, and that provided a lot of success. We were able to land good players, and I was able to be exposed to a lot of different situations that I hadn't in the past before, with big moves, big trades, you know, with the draft and free agency, even to make the relocation from St. Louis to Los Angeles and creating a whole new brand in a market like LA. I think all of that has prepared me to be in this chair now. A lot of people to thank along the way, but definitely I think all of that success has helped.
Brad Holmes, of course, is the general manager of the Detroit Lions, a proud A&T grad. He joins us here on the program. So, Brad, I'm going to try to bring something up on the screen. I'm going to try to bring a photo up on the screen for you, and just to kind of flash back a little bit, right? Look at that guy. Look at that guy right there. Right now, that guy right there is in the middle of one of the greatest, maybe the greatest defense actually in A&T's history, right? But one of the greatest defenses, perhaps in the history of 1AA at that time, then FCS. That was an absolute phenomenal defense. And if I'm not mistaken, you may have been one of the captains on that deep. Look at all the BJ Little and Darryl. Look at all those guys. Dwayne Carpenter played in the league.
That picture right there, man. That I still have that picture, and that picture represents so much. That championship defense that we had there, and it's crazy. A lot of those guys I still keep in contact with to this day. But that picture just says a lot. And yes, I was voted captain, and you know I was playing the 3-3 technique position at defensive tackle, and I want to say that was us coming off the field from the Aggie Eagle Classic in Raleigh playing Central, and it was a rainy day, and you know I'm the guy in the trenches playing defensive tackle, so they was running a lot of midline option and taking dives, so I was on the ground a little bit, you know, wasn't too proud of that, but at the same time that meant a lot because that defense there, that team, that 99 team, that's what taught me what a championship team's supposed to look like, the cohesiveness, you know, the togetherness, and still the things that 99 team had every single level, whatever it is, college, high school, little league, NFL, whatever level. That's what a championship team is: cohesiveness, is collaboration. Everybody's getting along. It's no ego, and that's what that team was, man.
You know what's interesting though, Brad? You became ultimately a public relations intern with the Rams. I don't recall seeing you in my office trying to do any work to prepare you to get to that point. I don't recall that.
Hey, Wild Bill Hayes, you know, he either had us in practice or running that hill. So it was that or class or being asleep. But but luckily, you know, shout out to Crosby Hall, you know, in getting that PR degree, you know, in mass comm. And I was very fortunate enough to speak to those students as well a little earlier this summer, which was I was very honored and humbled to speak to them and just kind of give them any advice or, you know, answer any questions. And there's a lot of talented kids there, very, very smart, very, very bright. They had great questions. And, you know, the PR degree, there's other avenues that you can utilize to, you know, not only get in the NFL, but stay in the NFL. You know, if you just want to have a PR degree and you stay in PR and football communications, you know, have a lot of respect. It's a hard job, you know, dealing with the media, serving the media, and, you know, make sure that the narrative is right.
Yeah, for you, even your time at A&T, you had some adversity. You were in a car accident, a very serious one, one in which ultimately, you know, you were even in a coma, but you were able to bounce back, still play, and then ultimately still be able to continue in football. Of course, ultimately now the general manager of the Lions.
Yeah, the biggest adversity that I faced for sure in my life, you know, down in Tampa, Florida, and, you know, got hit by a high-speed car, and you know, obviously had to miss that whole semester of football, and wasn't really thinking about football, laying up in ICU, was just happy to be alive, really. But doing the right things and getting the green light and being blessed to actually start doing some physical therapy and rehab to work myself back, being able to join my teammates back in the summer, and then actually coming back faster and stronger than I was. Because in there's a lot of perspective in that, because I think there's things that I was doing in college that I wasn't truly dedicating myself as probably as best as I could. And then when I found out that football was almost taken away from me, I was blessed enough to get a second chance, and then was working so much harder. So to come back from a near fatal car accident and come back bigger, faster, stronger, and still having success, that gave me a lot of perspective on life, and definitely let me know that, not to complain about this or that, not complain about practices or workouts. And truly, you got to embrace every single day, because you never know when it's going to be taken away from you.
Two last thoughts, Brad. We appreciate the time again. Brad Holmes is the general manager of the Detroit Lions. Your father, you touched on him a little bit earlier. He's an A&T guy. Speak about what the influence, and of course, played in the league, as you mentioned, the influence that he had on you.
Yeah, huge influence on me. Funny thing about my father is he never pushed football on me. He never did. Obviously I was around it all the time, but he just kind of waited for me to come and ask him to play football. But when I got done playing, finish up my career, I was thinking, I was like, oh man, my dad's probably disappointed that I didn't make it to the NFL just like he did. And he's, A&T grad, just as, him and my mother and my sister. And, my whole family's Aggies, if you didn't know. But,
Right.
but my dad was so happy that I was taking this route in terms of being in the front office and working in scouting and personnel. And, I had a lot of respect. He gave me a lot of wisdom, gave me a lot of advice, and a lot of the stories that he told me from when he was playing, as he was an offensive lineman. And back when he was playing, coming from an HBCU, going into the NFL, it wasn't in vogue for black offensive linemen. It wasn't a lot of blacks on the offensive line. It wasn't a lot of blacks at the quarterback position, for different stereotypes that he used to tell me. So that meant a lot for him to that meant a lot for me, for him to tell me that knowledge at an early age. And so now that when I'm in this position now and I look at players, making sure that I'm giving everybody a fair chance, a fair shot, and hopefully that those stigmas and those stereotypes can be erased very, very soon. But I think we're making progress. One of the last thing I say about my father is that he gave me a weight set um, for Christmas when I was in like the 8th grade, and he was telling me that it doesn't matter what you do when people are watching. It's about how you're working when nobody else is watching. And when I was named captain at A&T, I was running hills just by myself. And when I got named captain there, walking back to Cooper Hall, that's when it really dawned on me about, Dad was right. It's not about what you're doing when everybody else knows you're working hard. It's about how much personal pride you have and what you're doing when you don't think anybody's watching. So I really forever thank my father and love him to death for that.
Last thought, very well said. Last thought. We appreciate the time, Brad. Expectations. What are you had a really good draft class. As a matter of fact, got your number one guy that was on your board in Sewell, offensive lineman. What are the expectations for the Lions for the 2021 season?
Yeah, Dan and I talk about it all the time, and we just want to make sure that we're getting better every single week, and we're, as competitive as we can be. And wherever we are in week 1, we want to be better in week 2, and we want to be better in week 3. And that's really all we can ask for, just be as competitive as we can be. It's year 1. We're not taking our foot off the gas. That's not how we started. We're being as aggressive, in being rational and being smart with everything as well. But those are the expectations. Just make sure we're getting a little bit better every single day. And Dan preaches that, and we're aligned with that message. So that's all we can do. What we're going to do is basically we're going to control what we can control, and we can control our effort, how much passion we have with these players that we brought in, and what we put out there on the field.
Brad Holmes, again, general manager of the Detroit Lions, A&T grad as well, joins us here on BOXTOROW. Man, it's been, and by the way, Maurice Smith is the one who sent that photo to me. Of course, he was part of that team. As a lot of guys on that team went to the league. And then even after that, you got Kwasi Mitchell and Maurice Hicks and all those guys that went to the Deloach, all of those guys. You think you played with all of those guys. As a matter of fact, man, I really appreciate the time. Continued success to you and the Lions.
Thank you so much. I got to get on Mo Smith for sending pictures to you, man. I got to see what else he sent you, man. Well, hey, I appreciate you having me on, Donald. Aggie Pride all day.
Yes, sir.
Really appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you later.
Very good.